When Eleanor opened her front door that morning, she never expected to find him standing there, a tall, quiet man in a tweed coat, holding a small suitcase and wearing the same confused expression she had. "Arthur Caldwell," he said, extending a trembling hand. "Apparently. I'm supposed to stay here?" Eleanor blinked. "Stay here? With me?" That's when she saw the note taped to her kitchen counter. Her daughter-in-law's handwriting, neat but cold. "We're away for the weekend. You two can keep each other company. Don't get into trouble." The nerve. They'd set her up. Eleanor had always been the difficult one, the outspoken mother-in-law who refused to play nice. And Arthur? He was the stepfather no one invited to dinners. Two problems, neatly locked together so the family could enjoy a peaceful holiday without them. But as the hours passed, and the initial shock turned into reluctant conversation over lukewarm coffee, Eleanor realized something unsettling. Arthur wasn't the clueless old man they thought he was. He noticed things, little details, truths buried beneath smiles. "My stepdaughter thinks she's clever," he said with a smirk. "She forgets I taught her how to lie." By nightfall, Eleanor's irritation had transformed into intrigue. Two abandoned souls. Two unwanted relatives. And one shared betrayal. That's when Arthur leaned forward and said softly, "What if we stopped playing their game, and started our own?" The air grew still. The fire crackled, and Eleanor, for the first time in years, smiled. Because her daughter-in-law's game had just backfired. By the second morning, Eleanor had stopped pretending she was angry. She wasn't angry, she was insulted. Her daughter-in-law, Rachel, had arranged this little holiday prank, thinking it would humble her, silence her sharp tongue and old-fashioned pride. But Rachel didn't understand. Eleanor had spent a lifetime surviving sharper games than this. Arthur sat across from her at the breakfast table, reading the same note for the 10th time. "She really wrote this like we're children," he muttered, tapping the paper. Eleanor smirked. "Let her think we are. Children can be unpredictable." As the day went on, the awkward silence between them softened into something else, strategy. They discovered they shared more than betrayal. Both had been quietly pushed out of their families' lives. Their opinions ignored, their loyalty dismissed as outdated. Arthur told her how Rachel had sold his late wife's piano without telling him, said it was just taking up space. Eleanor confessed that her son had recently changed the locks on her farmhouse, by mistake. Two stories, same cruelty. And then, as the evening light turned gold, Eleanor looked at Arthur and said, "Maybe it's time our dear family learned what outdated really means." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting revenge?" "Not revenge," she said, standing. "A lesson." That night, over whiskey and candlelight, they planned something small, harmless, at first. A little reminder that the people they'd underestimated still knew how to pull strings. Arthur laughed, low and genuine. "You know, they think we'll argue ourselves to death." Eleanor smirked. "Let's give them something better to talk about." Outside, snow began to fall. Inside, two forgotten souls began rewriting the rules of the game. The next morning, Eleanor woke up before sunrise. The house was cold and quiet, the kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound too loud. She slipped on her robe, glanced toward the guest room, and found Arthur already awake, sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, sketching something on the back of an envelope. "What's that?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "An idea." He turned the envelope around. It was a list, their list. Names, events, little injustices. Rachel's name was circled in red. Eleanor chuckled darkly. "You really came prepared for this, didn't you?" Arthur shrugged. "She once told me I was too sentimental to fight back. I think it's time to prove her wrong." That day, they started small. Eleanor called her son, pretending to sound frail, worried. "Oh, dear, the heating stopped working. And I can't seem to find Rachel's phone number." Her son sighed impatiently. "Mom, we're away. Rachel's busy." "Just ask Arthur to help." Arthur took the phone gently from Eleanor's hand. "No problem, son. I'll take good care of your mother." There was a pause. Then the line went dead. They exchanged a knowing glance. The seed was planted. As the day unfolded, Arthur and Eleanor began weaving a web of subtle moves. Calls, notes, stories that traveled through the family grapevine faster than truth ever could. By nightfall, their children's phones were buzzing, questions piling up. Why is Mom with him? Did you know they're staying together? Wait, are they? Eleanor laughed so hard she cried. Let them wonder, she whispered. It's about time they learned what it feels like to lose control. Arthur raised his glass. To confusion. To justice, Eleanor corrected, her eyes gleaming. But as the fire flickered between them, Arthur's smile faded just slightly, because he'd realized something Eleanor hadn't. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was starting to feel real. By the fourth day, the house didn't feel like Eleanor's anymore. It felt like theirs. Arthur had fixed the broken heater, cooked breakfast that actually tasted like something, and filled the quiet spaces with laughter that neither of them remembered missing. They'd started the day by rereading Rachel's smug note, now pinned to the refrigerator like a trophy. Keep each other company, Eleanor read aloud, sipping her tea. She really has no idea how right she was. Arthur smiled. Maybe we should thank her someday. Eleanor chuckled, but her laughter softened into silence. She watched him, the way he looked out the window, the lines of loss carved into his face. He wasn't just a pawn in her revenge anymore. Later that afternoon, they sat by the fire again, reviewing what had happened so far. Rumors had started spreading. Rachel's sister called, her son texted 3 times, and apparently someone from church had heard things. The plan was working perfectly, but something else was happening too, something Eleanor hadn't planned. When she caught Arthur humming softly while fixing a drawer, her heart twisted in a way that scared her. It had been years since she'd looked at someone without suspicion. Arthur, she said suddenly, why didn't you remarry after your wife passed? He looked up. Because I thought no one would understand what I lost. Their eyes met, briefly, too long for comfort. That night, while Arthur read in the living room, Eleanor sat in her bedroom staring at her reflection. She whispered, almost to herself, what am I doing? Downstairs, Arthur closed his book and sighed. The game had gone too far, and yet, neither wanted to stop playing. Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the house in silence again. 2 strangers, thrown together by manipulation, were becoming something else entirely. And neither Rachel nor her husband had the faintest idea what storm they'd started. The sound of tires crunching over snow broke the quiet morning. Eleanor froze by the window. The car she'd hoped would never return, was back. Arthur walked in, drying his hands with a towel. They're early, he said calmly, though his eyes betrayed the tension beneath. Rachel and Eleanor's son stepped out of the car, dragging their suitcases through the snow. Rachel's smile was wide, but it didn't reach her eyes. She wasn't surprised, she was ready. Eleanor felt her stomach tighten. For days, she had rehearsed this moment in her head, the triumphant return, her chance to remind them she wasn't fragile, forgotten, or controllable. But now that they were here, something inside her shook. Arthur placed a steady hand on her shoulder. You've got this, he whispered. When the door opened, Rachel's perfume hit the room before she did. Well, she said sweetly, looks like you two survived each other. Arthur smiled politely. We did more than survive, we thrived. Eleanor's son frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Eleanor took a slow breath, glancing between the two of them. It means, dear, that while you were away playing house in the tropics, Arthur and I learned a few things about family, like who really belongs in one. Rachel's expression flickered. Excuse me? Arthur stepped closer, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. You've been treating people like pawns, Rachel. But pawns can reach the end of the board too. For the first time, Rachel looked unsure. Her eyes darted between the 2 older faces, confident, united, dangerous in their calm. Then her phone buzzed. She looked down, confusion twisting her face. The lawyer, she muttered. Arthur's lips curved just slightly. Ah, yes. I asked him to stop by today. I figured you'd want to be here when the truth came out. Eleanor leaned in, her voice quiet but razor sharp. Welcome home, darling. The room went still. The game was no longer just theirs. Rachel stood frozen in the doorway as the lawyer stepped inside, shaking snow from his coat. The air was thick, the kind of silence that hums before thunder. Mrs. Collins, he said politely, nodding to Eleanor. Mr. Hayes. Then, with a glance at Rachel and her husband, he added, "And I assume you've both returned just in time." Rachel's eyes narrowed. In time for what exactly? The lawyer adjusted his glasses, opening a manila envelope. For the formal reading of the property reassignment. As requested by Mr. Collins. Eleanor's son turned pale. Wait. What reassignment? Arthur leaned back, his tone casual but sharp as glass. Oh, your mother didn't tell you? We've been working on a little paperwork while you were gone. You know, fixing a few oversights. Rachel snatched the papers, scanning them furiously. Her hands trembled. This isn't possible. The deed. Eleanor interrupted, her voice calm, almost kind. The deed was always mine, dear. You just convinced my son to sign over his half when I wasn't looking. But you made a mistake. Rachel's throat tightened. What mistake? You forgot who built this house, Eleanor said softly. And who owns the land beneath it. The lawyer cleared his throat. Per the updated documents, ownership is being reinstated to Mrs. Collins and her chosen trustee, Mr. Hayes. Rachel blinked. Trustee? Arthur folded his arms. It means she trusts me, something you never earned. The color drained from Rachel's face. For once, she had no words, no smile to hide behind. Eleanor took a slow step forward, eyes steady. You wanted everything I had. My home. My peace. Even my dignity. But you see, darling, when you set a trap for someone like me, you'd better be sure I don't still know how to fight. Rachel stumbled back, her voice breaking. You can't do this. Eleanor's expression softened, but her words hit like a hammer. Oh, sweetheart. I already did. Arthur met Eleanor's gaze, a quiet, knowing look. The storm had broken, but it wasn't rage filling the air now. It was justice. Outside, the snow stopped falling. Inside, Rachel finally understood what it meant to lose everything, not through theft, but through truth. The papers fell from Rachel's hands, scattering across the hardwood floor like shattered glass. She didn't even try to pick them up. For the first time, her perfect posture faltered. You think you've won? She spat, her voice trembling between anger and fear. You have no idea what I've done for this family. Eleanor's son reached out to her. Rachel, stop. She jerked away. No. He doesn't get to act innocent either. Do you know how long I've been cleaning up your messes? Your gambling, your debts, your weakness. The room went silent. Her words sliced through the air like a blade. Arthur took a slow step forward. And your answer was to take everything that wasn't yours? Rachel turned to him, eyes flashing. You don't understand. You never lost everything. You never had to claw your way out of nothing. Arthur's face hardened, his calm voice steady. You're wrong. I lost a wife, a home, and 20 years of peace. But I never stole to fill that hole. Eleanor's eyes softened as she looked at him. That's why you're here, Arthur. Because you know what it means to rebuild without destroying. Rachel let out a bitter laugh, tears mixing with fury. So this was your plan? The two of you teaming up to humiliate me? Eleanor shook her head slowly. No, dear. I didn't need to humiliate you. You did that yourself. Rachel's face crumpled. For a moment, she looked less like a villain, more like a woman who'd finally run out of lies. Then Eleanor's son spoke quietly, voice cracking. Rachel, is it true? About the debts? Rachel didn't answer. She just stared at the floor, eyes glassy. Silence filled the space where her pride used to live. Arthur placed a hand on Eleanor's arm, grounding her. Let her go, he murmured. The fight's over. But Eleanor didn't look away. No, Arthur. The fight's never been about her. It's about me remembering who I am, and what I built. Outside, the wind howled again, shaking the windows. Rachel slowly turned toward the door, her shoulders slumped, her voice barely a whisper. You'll regret this. Eleanor met her gaze one last time. No, sweetheart. I'll finally sleep tonight. Rachel left without another word. The echo of the closing door carried the weight of everything she destroyed, and everything Eleanor had just reclaimed. Arthur exhaled. It's over. Eleanor smiled faintly, tears in her eyes. No, Arthur. It's just beginning. The house felt heavier after Rachel left, as if her presence had soaked into the walls and now finally began to drain away. Eleanor stood in the middle of the living room, the ticking of the old clock echoing through the silence. Arthur was by the fireplace, staring at the papers Rachel had dropped. He didn't move, didn't speak, just listened to the faint sound of snow melting on the roof. After a while, Eleanor broke the silence. She was right about one thing, she said softly. We all lost something along the way. Arthur turned to her. You didn't lose. You just gave too much. Eleanor smiled sadly. Maybe that's the same thing. She walked to the window, her reflection merging with the falling snow outside. I built this house with my husband. Every nail, every brick meant something. Then, when he passed, I thought keeping it alive would keep him alive. Her voice trembled. But somewhere along the way, I started letting people take pieces of it, and of me. Arthur's eyes softened. He stepped closer but kept his distance, careful not to break the fragile calm. You don't owe anyone forgiveness, Eleanor. Especially not her. She turned to him, tears gathering but not falling. And what about you, Arthur? What do you owe? He hesitated, then exhaled, his voice quiet. A second chance, if life's still giving them out. The words lingered between them like warm breath on cold glass. Eleanor studied him, this man who had walked into her home a stranger and stood beside her like an anchor in the storm. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small or alone. I used to think I was finished, she said. That everything worth living for had already happened. But maybe this house isn't just about holding on. Maybe it's about starting over. Arthur's smile was faint but real. If anyone deserves that, it's you. Outside, the snow began to glow under the afternoon sun, the world slowly softening again. Eleanor turned back to the fire, her voice barely above a whisper. Then maybe it's time I stop guarding ghosts, and start living again. Arthur nodded, the light catching in his eyes. Then let's start there. The camera would linger on them, two people framed by warmth and silence, the weight of the past finally giving way to something new. A week had passed since that night. The snow had melted into small rivers that ran down the driveway, taking the last traces of winter with them. The house, once heavy with bitterness, now smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paint. Eleanor stood by the porch, watching Arthur hammer a loose plank back into place. His hands were steady, patient, the kind of patience that comes from a life that's already known loss. You don't have to fix everything, she said softly, leaning on her cane. Arthur looked up with a faint grin. You'd be surprised how much better things hold when someone actually cares. Eleanor laughed quietly, the sound surprising even her. It's been a long time since this house heard laughter. He nodded, setting the hammer down. Then let's make up for lost time. For a while, they just stood there, two souls bound by years and silence. Then Arthur broke it. When my wife passed, he began, voice low, I shut everything out. Friends, family, even my own son. I thought if I stayed still long enough, maybe time would stop hurting. Eleanor's expression softened. And did it? He smiled sadly. No. It just stopped living. Eleanor reached out, resting her hand over his. Grief doesn't ask permission. It just takes what it wants. But eventually, you decide what it leaves behind. Arthur met her eyes, and for a moment, neither spoke. The world outside faded, the rustle of wind, the creak of old wood, the hum of something new being born. You've got more fight in you than anyone I've ever met, he said. Eleanor chuckled. You've only seen the polite version. They both laughed, and in that sound was something like peace, fragile, real, and earned. Then Eleanor looked at the horizon, where the sun dipped low and golden. Arthur, she said, voice steady, I've spent my life guarding what's mine. But maybe, it's time to share what's left. He smiled softly. Then I'll help you protect it, not from the world, but with it. The camera would pull back slowly, two figures standing in the fading light, the old house behind them finally looking like a home again. Because sometimes, rebuilding isn't about wood and nails. It's about choosing who stands beside you when you start over. Spring came quietly that year. The fields behind the house bloomed again, wildflowers stretching toward the sunlight like they'd been waiting for permission. Eleanor sat on the porch in her favorite chair, a faded quilt over her knees. The house was alive again, laughter from neighbors fixing the fence, the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen. Arthur stepped outside, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Still take it black? He asked. Eleanor smiled, the corners of her eyes softening. I'm too old to change that now. He handed her the mug and sat beside her. For a long moment, they didn't speak. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was warm, earned. Then Eleanor looked at him. You know, I thought the hardest part of losing everything was starting over. But it wasn't. Arthur turned to her, curious. What was? Letting go of the anger, she said quietly. It's easier to hold a grudge than to hold hope. Arthur nodded slowly. Hope takes more strength. She smiled faintly. And I think I finally have enough. The wind stirred through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of lilac, her husband's favorite flower. Eleanor tilted her head up to the sky. He'd have liked you, you know, she said softly. Arthur chuckled. Then I'm in good company. They sat there watching the sun sink low, its light spilling across the porch like liquid gold. The old house creaked, not with age this time, but with life, a heartbeat rediscovered. Eleanor took a deep breath. Funny, isn't it? How you can lose everything and still find something better. Arthur looked out at the horizon. That's the thing about starting over, he said. It doesn't mean forgetting. It just means forgiving. The camera would pull back slowly, 2 figures framed by the sunset, a home reborn behind them. Eleanor's voice would echo softly, one final line. He wanted my land, my home, my legacy, but what I built wasn't just walls. It was strength. And it's still mine. Fade out. The wind hushes. The music swells. And for the first time in years, the world feels right again. In the end, life doesn't take from us, it tests us. It strips away everything we thought we needed, until all that's left is what truly matters. Eleanor lost her home, her trust, her peace, but she found something stronger than revenge, forgiveness. And sometimes, that's the hardest battle to win. Because when the storm passes, the only thing that remains is who you choose to be. She thought she was playing a game. But in the end, she only played herself.